I started off as a winder, and I went as a little piecer and a helper, and then I was a side piecer in the mule room.
Can you tell me a typical day for you doing this job?
Right. It started 7:30, and it was 120 degrees heat to start off. If it was any cooler than that, the ends wouldn't run, so they had to have the heat. And you'd start off dusting down, because every night the fluff would settle on everything. So everything would be dusted down and battered, and you would have to oil all the spindles, clean all the ends before you set the machines off, and you'd have to change bobbins that was getting ready for changing and laying bobbins on. Come to the centre of the room together, and then the fallers would change, and then they'd run back, and when they'd run back you'd have to be quick, get the ends to piece them up. That's my piecing up finger. Can you see the two bones there?
Could you tell me exactly what a mule was?
A mule? It stretched from one end of the room to the other end of the room, and it had a creel at the back with hundreds of bobbins in, and then it had, in the middle of these, had a big headstock with all different kinds of wheels. You'd have thought you had a steam engine in the middle of the room on this, and there was not just one, there was row and row and row after those. And the mules, all the ends came under rollers, different size rollers, and then a soft roller that had leather on that you put a hook on, and then as the rollers pressed down onto the cotton, it narrowed it out, and as it came through the last roller it came out very thin. But to make that happen you had to have different cog wheels that they changed over for different counts. Like if they were running 50s, then they were thick, and I used to work on 122s, and there was nearly as thin as a bobbin of cotton, and if you coughed your ends came down, and if you sneezed they come down, and you had to keep going. And those only worked on what they call a full tube, like a long pencil, and the tube went onto the spindle and then would run on your fine tubes. And to make them run easier and better, some of the spinners had all their own ideas, and some of them used to have a block of soap and they would go across the top of the spindle to make it like a candle would on a wax, to just wax the end. So as when the cotton stopped at the end ready for changing over, the ends wouldn't break. It used to make them fall down onto the bobbin, and then they'd spin. And then once the cops was ready for doffing, that was the hard job, because there was a little handle, a steel handle like that, at what they called the headstock, and you had to hold this, and as the wheels moved up a little bit you had to hold it and hold it and hold it, and then he'd run it on the end, and then he'd drop a lever, and then you could leave go of it. But if you left go of that handle before, you'd break every end on the machine and you'd be in some trouble, because when you had all a side came down, everybody in the room had to stop their machines to come and help you piece them up, because it would take for hours if they didn't. And you start doffing on what was the cops. It's hard to show you a cop, but it was a bobbin of cotton, like imagine a small reel of cotton, but a long one like this, and it had a tube going through it, and you had to pile them all on your arms like that, and you'd have a great big armful of bobbins, but narrow ones, and you'd have to hold them, bring them down and drop them slowly into one line in a skip, and if they fell over you could get a smack over the head for letting them drop over, because they had to pile them up then and it was wasting time to get the machines going. So they did that each one, and then a truck would take them away. But to keep the machines going you had to feed them, so that meant they'd bring big bobbins like that, and they'd be about that wide, and they had little metal ends on the end, and you got to put 3 of your fingers, you had to lift them up in 3, so you had to put 3 on, stretch on them, and 3 on them. You had to lift them up and put them on top of a creel, and you had to bend in a narrow skip that wide, that long, and about that high, and you had to cut down and down and put them up, put them up. And as they came out, all the cotton came off the bobbins to make these fine cops, you had to keep feeding them, and you would get the bobbin and you'd have to twist it, put it back on the skewer and put it in, and you'd have to be very careful you didn't knock any out or you would be in big trouble. And you'd have to sweep all the floor to keep the cotton up, and you'd sweep from one end to the headstock in the morning, and then in the afternoon you would sweep from the headstock to the other end in the afternoon to keep it going. Spinners would have a piece of cloth which they would make, and they'd have to have it just one width with like garden stakes through, and they used to fan all the machines to keep the dust down. And more they did the fanning, and more you had to sweep to keep the dust up.